So hello, everyone, and welcome to our second day of MMVC 21. This is Natalie Deutsch, and our presenter is Dr. Ramesh Sharma, who's there. Yes, and it's really exciting to be able to connect with friends and colleagues online, even though it's nicer face-to-face, but online is what we get these days. I'm going to introduce our speaker. Dr. Ramesh Sharma teaches instructional design at a university in New Delhi, Ahmedkar University. And he has taught educational technology and learning resources at Wawasan Open University in Malaysia. He's an expert in open and distance and technology mediated learning and has served as a visiting professor at Universidad do Estado. Do you know Spanish by any chance? Da Bahia, UNEB, Salvador, Bahia, Brazil. And I think you left, University of Guyana as well, where the native language is English. So that's a good thing. Visiting professor, University of Fiji, Commonwealth of Learning as director of the Commonwealth Educational Media Center for Asia in New Delhi, regional director of Indira Gandhi National Open University, India, and director of distance education at, I mentioned that at the University of Guyana. I think that's when we actually met online. And on WikiEducator, of course, in probably around 2007. He's also the editor of the Asian Journal of Distance Education and so much more. I don't think you could list the various things that Dr. Sharma has done over the years. So it's really a pleasure to have an expert with us when it comes to online learning and not just someone that just started because of the pandemic. So, thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'll let you share the information with us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nelly. And it is always a pleasure to work with you. In fact, I remember that when we were working on our monthly winner for WikiEducator, it was such a beautiful thing, to see the pages of all our colleagues and then identify that, okay, this person is the winner of this month. And our colleagues, they have created wonderful pages for that. So yes.
Let's get back. Let's get back. I think this is the right time. Let's talk about
that. I agree. And I noted that recently you have done something for OER and Wiki there. So it will be great. Okay, friends, thank you so much for joining me on this session. And I attended some of the programs of the speakers before me, and a wonderful thing. And I think it is maybe by natural design that my presentation is in sync and in line with the presenters who have shared their knowledge previously. So it is good. Okay. We are not able to travel and meet in person, face to face, due to this coronavirus pandemic. And in fact, it has been more than a crisis. It has been a global wake-up call to change our paradigms and the way we perceive the world. And not surprisingly, this pandemic has altered the way we interpret the normal as well as the way we live. Normal by nature is a relative term, and presently we have different variations of it. We call it normal, new normal, next normal, so many normal things. But nevertheless, it is important to always remember that once new normal can be someone else normal, or once normal could have been seen as new normal for someone else. So likewise, normal and new normal for some can be the next normal for others. These derivations of normal suggest that we are experiencing an unprecedented time, one marked by major shifts in the way we understand and interpret different areas of life, not at least all of education. which has and will continue to undergo changes, particularly in the way we teach and learn. And with this wide range of written and oral arguments already made on this subject, there is uncertainty surrounding what the future will bring to us, which means that now is the time to ask what is past, what is present, and what is next for that. Today, we live in a really a strange new world. And some of the scholars, they have called this as a VUCA world, a volatile, uncertain, ambiguous, and we use a complex, C for complex. And where this is strange in the sense that nowadays, keeping distance is considered as this social thing. And being positive is labeled as has some negative connotations. So we should not be corona positive that way. And these developments, they suggest that we are on the brink of a new future where time would be understood in terms of BC and AC, means before COVID and after COVID. In fact, we are going through a global reset of many things, including education. So sooner or later, we will have to face the consequences generated by the emergence of this new era, and the bright or dark future paths they will alternatively put on us. So what happened then? With these closures of educational institutions at every level, nearly the whole world shifted to online and what we call it as ERE, the emergency remote education. And this shift has been designated as the great online learning experiment, through which we will be able to really understand what works and what does not. While this emergency remote education and distance education appear to be the same thing, they are actually distinct from one another. The primary difference between these two is that distance education is an optional, a planned activity which is grounded in theoretical and practical knowledge. Whereas emergency remote education is a mandatory, currently a survival mode of education implemented in times of crisis and using all the resources available, including offline and online education. Whereas in distance education, it is to minimize the transactional or psychological distance to facilitate the continuity of teaching and learning. And in this context, as long as what we practice is an obligation rather than an option, we can think of it as a last measure and therefore define it as emergency remote education. During this pandemic, the nuances which were, say, misinterpreted or mistranslated between these two terms, they have created and taken care of some of the confusion, and it has created some educational missteps also in that. And what is that? It leads to the educational sense, Control C and Control V, very popular with all of us, and particularly when it is in the computing environment. And yet in this emergency remote education, the same principle, the mechanism of copying and pasting cannot be applied. As seen in failure of copying the traditional face-to-face education and pasting it in online education. Instead, we should be using Control O, means to open a new document, new chapter, here we can call it. Imitating a process meant for something else has resulted in unsuccessful and ineffective learning experiences, contributing to the bad reputation of distance education, the effects of which will be remembered in post-COVID times. And to remedy this situation, the benefits and positive features of distance education need to be explained, advocated, and promoted. In a nutshell, the distance learning's blind imitation of face-to-face instruction, it has been the chief educational error. Metaphorically, an educational sin during this pandemic, one which will have both short-term and long-term consequences in the post-COVID world. And in the post-COVID world, we can expect there to be negative consequences from the great online experiment, most predominantly the digital fatigue, an issue that will certainly surface in the near and distant future. I remember that last year there were so many webinars and online classes are going on, and one of the student was really frustrated, and she posted on my Facebook page also that, sir, when this pandemic will be over, and we are really bored by these online classes because of this digital fatigue. And means it has given rise to a certain complex and multidimensional problems. The symptoms associated with these digital fatigue, they include stress, fatigue, desensitization towards the environment, loss of interest, physical and mental problems. And though the fatigue is largely related to our physical and mental performance, more recently, it has been linked to the digital tools or the spaces we use during online education. And teachers and learners alike can experience burnout as a result of multitasking, gazing constantly at the screen, hyper-focusing, adapting to online timing, dissonance between the real world and the virtual world, body-mind disconnection, lack of natural rhythm, feeling of being monitored. Even there is a strong discussion nowadays in some of the forums where I have noted. The question is that whether we should ask the students to keep their camera on or off. And there are arguments in both the favor of there. And then the extensive efforts involved in interpreting online conversations without the aid of non-verbal or visual clues. However, the recipe to prevent digital burnout and fatigue is relatively simple. Apply the best theories and practices of online distance education and design actual learning processes rather than processes with techno-fetish designs. And just now, Dr. Poonam was speaking about resilient course design. And before that also our good speakers, they presented a beautiful tips for those that what we can follow and what we can do about it. But this digital problem is also another issue. It refers to the gap between those who have and don't have access to computers and the internet. And this has evolved over time and emerged in new forms also. While the idea of a human divide is not limited to digital form, and it never was, currently it is the digital divide that has been threatening the entire globe. And while we are already well aware of the cultural, religious, ethnic, and economic divides that separate humanity from an educational perspective, we are now witnessing that the digital divide is far greater than we imagined, as it is responsible for grave inequalities, and injustices. The question is, how do we respond as a global society? Should we continue to let the gap widen, or should we act now before the gap grows out of control? In addition to the many and diverse problems around the world, the COVID-19 pandemic has generated a great degree of uncertainty regarding the future of globalization, especially when it relates to the education. And deglobalization measures were already taken on the rise when it struck us, but reached its peak in the responses to many countries to close their borders to slow down the spread of pandemic. And there were some other developments going on, like we saw Brexit, trade wars, economic recessions, political unrest, and rising of individualism and nationalism. So there are known pandemic regions also, which is driving this deglobalization. The global village, which was proposed by Marshall McLuhan in 1962, has been transformed into a global online village, where online infrastructures, communications, and interactions, they have a pivotal role into it. And thus it can be, means we can see that the internationalization of higher education, it will shrink. It is already happening due to travel bans and restrictions. Higher education institutions whose financial stability relies heavily on international students, they need to develop new business models and find different sources to fund to survive. Uh, I know that nowadays there are many private universities in various countries. I was teaching in Malaysia and in India also. I see. So means the new ways are being, new strategies are being thought out, that how we can. And then the virtual exchange programs, it looks like they will gain more importance and be more valuable. However, these higher education institutions, it looks like they will be forced to collaborate more, develop more services to compete, and utilize online spaces more efficiently. So then many universities who have already adopted digital transformation strategies as a way to be resilient in the digital knowledge age. And this trend has been accelerated on account of this pandemic. So as such, the digital ecosystems, it has emerged, and like natural ecosystems, Fitchman and Lopes sometimes ago, they said that it consists of species, populations, and communities interacting with each other and with the environment. So the winds of change have now turned into a storm of change, with most higher education institutions being forced uh, either to move their presences to digital environments or to create new digital identities. And in creating a digital presence, a digital twin needs to be birthed. In other words, physical campuses are reproducing digital versions of themselves. And this requires that many educational theories be modified and integrated when adapting to shifting landscape. This idea of virtual campuses being projections of physical campuses, that is the digital twins, and built on the model of digital ecosystems, promotes many questions. For instance, how will we regulate these spaces? How will learners form their digital identities? How will we ensure equity, equality, justice? How will we react to incidences of racial, religious, ethnic, social, economic discrimination? And how will we ensure and enable efficient, effective, and sustainable teaching and learning processes? In a way, in addition to the opportunities offered by these digital campuses, there will be many challenges. Challenges we must be proactive in addressing and managing there. It certainly be comfortable to accept that this year, the 2020, it was awful. But then this year 2021, and we thought that it will be better and a happier year. Is it? We just passed mid 2021, means now we are in August, and we are facing Delta variant, and then this another problem of Pegasus, it has also come up as a global problem. And maybe we can ask ourselves, are we on the verge of descending into George Orwell's 1984, a time which depicts dystopian world and warns about totalitarianism and mass surveillance? Recent developments, they imply that we have reason to worry, particular about a panoptical society which has been designed. Foucault said in 1977 that they arrange the things that the surveillance is permanent in its effect. And in this panoptical society, where data is distilled, as we say that data is the new oil, through surveillance, beyond the unease over the collection and mining of digital footprints or the violations of privacy and mass surveillance, there is the concern that the imposition of these features of the panoptic society will gradually lead to our acceptance and normalization of them. However, despite these many concerns. Some people are willing to overlook them in exchange for making profits at all costs. In education, students have been particularly affected by these issues as they are under constant fear of being red flagged during online proctoring by appearing on the webcam in different color or failing to keep their eyes focused on the screen. Yet, it is not just the gathering of data or proctoring that raises questions. There are also the matters of ethics, ethical codes, algorithmic biases, and the last of which is a major issue of concern. Here you can see that Audrey Waters said that every student is guilty until the algorithm proves their innocence. So that's it. And while there have been regulations like GDPR in Europe, functions as online safety measures, proctoring and surveillance strategies, they are constantly improving, and thus proactive measures need to be continually taken to protect learners. Moreover, some higher education institutions, they are aggressive in their adoption of the latest technologies and fail to put in due diligence of identifying and applying the ethical codes to protect learners from the side effects of this proctoring and surveillance related practices. Last but not the least, in this case, in many cases, it should be loudly articulated that the problems are not surveillance technologies, but how the humans use them. And like the Israeli company also saying that we created this software, it is you people who, the way you are using it. And while we understand how these technologies can be used to violate ethical principles, human nature is unpredictable and prone to getting stuck in Stockholm syndrome loop, where we keep on using technologies that only serve to harm us. Again, the pandemic has uncovered many facts that have hitherto been ignored. As we started wearing masks, the real features of higher education have been unmasked. And we can now see higher education with no clothes. And if higher education is with nothing to cover its faults, we can and should shout, the emperor has no clothes. In higher education, there are many issues that, though known about for many years, have never been addressed. For instance, higher education is not immune to capitalist approaches, as witnessed by many universities that function as for-profit companies. Student debts are a major issue. It is nearly impossible to pursue higher education without financial support, a reality that stands in stark contrast to the universal values of education and further conflicts with basic human rights, which demand that every individual has the right to education. Furthermore, most higher education institutions depend on their funding from international students. Yet, as a result of deglobalization and the decrease in the number of international students due to closing of the borders or maybe political conflicts, many of these institutions are at the risk of going bankrupt like a company. This decrease in financial inputs directly affects the faculty insofar as it threatens the loss of their jobs. And I know that some of my friends, they have also suffered a loss of their job because during this pandemic close time when there were no classes, so the management decided that since there was no teaching, no salary or very less salary paid to them. So there were really very, very serious concerns about it. And another issue that has recently emerged is the role of higher education institutions, that is their main function to produce universal knowledge, prepare learners for life, or maintaining a balance among these diverse roles. In carrying out these various roles, there has been a growing trend to unbundle, which refers to higher education institutions dispensing with specialization in each and every step of their services and outsource them in order to operate more operationally. So it is high time for higher education to renew, recalibrate, and reposition itself in the educational landscape. This would require these institutions to regenerate itself and be born again, like the phoenix, called as Anqua or Simorgh. It needs to rise from the ashes, but do this it must first face the flames. Now, the entire educational landscape has needed educational resources capable of being shared among and within the educational networks. In this regard, the OER, Open Educational Resources, and OEP, Open Educational Practices, have played a significant role in ensuring the continuity of education. Efforts also needed to be in during the reducing the social injustice, inequality, and inequity in meeting educational needs. And if we see the traditional business models, learning materials are copyrighted, meaning that the use of these materials require permission, or say from the payment to the or to the permission from the copyright holder. During emergency situations like this, the copyrighted learning materials can be an obstacle to deliver educational content. Therefore, we need to promote OEP and OER, and the initiatives to raise awareness and incentives should be developed to encourage educators, and particularly we like Wiki-Educator, our most beloved platform, to produce and use OER as a way to sustain the open educational practices. While the efforts and the advocacy put forth for the greater openness have been appreciated, additional work is still needed. For example, there is a need to develop repositories through which OER can be organized, personalized, contextualized, and delivered. So the openness will contribute for making higher education ecosystem more resilient. Poonamji was citing to it. For further crisis, and the sustainability of this ecosystem can be fueled by the open licensed inputs and outputs. So that is a very serious thing. But who has the ownership of knowledge, and why is sharing as a practice important? Let's explore this questions by looking at the life of nomads. The origin of open education dates back or earlier than we imagine. While it is commonly believed that the open education can be traced back to the correspondence education, particularly Pittman, Isaac Pittman started shorthand sending the lessons. We think that that was the era the correspondence education started from there. It was actually already available in unstructured form. Long ago, there were two ways of living: nomadic or settled. So nomads, for instance, do not settle down, but rather wander around to find resources and survive. Such a way of life made sharing an indispensable feature. They moved around in groups to collaborate and share tools, crafts, experiences, and knowledge. So storytelling was vital for the nomads, as it was one of the ways they could transmit their cultural accumulation, knowledge, observations, and experiences from one generation to another generation, and thereby secure their survival and the preservation of universal values. Knowledge was freely available to everyone. But this transition from nomadic life to settlements involved a significant amount of teaching and learning using different forms of soft and hard educational technologies. Yet with these limitations of primitive ways of teaching and learning, open educational practices such as drawing pictures on the cave walls, storytelling, writing on blocks located in open public places or on parchment or papyrus began to emerge as a way to share knowledge. From this, we can see that the OEP existed long before the introduction of the digital forms as we know. And during the first wave of this pandemic, COVID-19, the OERs which were developed to serve the OEP needs, they were not referred to as OER nor properly licensed, despite being shared in offline and online communities. These practices were in contrast to the arguments stating that OER should function within the framework of the 5 Rs as suggested by David Wiley. Means like retaining, reusing, revising, remixing, and redistribution of the educational content and be freely available through Creative Commons licenses. Although truth be told, publicly available materials do not always require licensing for their use, because being publicly available grants such invisible licenses by default. So in the wake of this pandemic, we have been focused to revisit our earlier traditions, follow our instincts, share and collaborate to survive, just like the nomads had to do. And we have not let the idea of open be strictly defined with the framework such as 5 Rs, but rather instinctively, unwittingly, and unintentionally shared in order to survive these wild times. These behaviors, they raise certain critical questions like how do we define openness and what does openness mean, and if it is indeed open, how many shades and grays, to what extent it is open. And particularly I like the example given by David Wiley when he's explaining openness, that you see the door, how open it is and how close it is, that defines the openness. Or our eyes, how much open our eyes are closed or open, that to what extent it is. Now, in our journal, we in our editorial, we gave an argument that what we teach in these times can have secondary importance. We have to keep in mind that the students will remember not the educational content delivered, but how they felt during these hard times. And with an empathetic approach, the story will not center on how successfully we delivered the educational content, but it will be on how learners narrate these times. And it can be suggested that the care and empathy, they have prominent roles in the time of trauma. And what is trauma is that any event or a series of events or a set of circumstances as described by Shamsha, experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or threatening, and that has been lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning, be in physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So, given these effects that the traumatic events can have on learners' well-being, we must be sure to create a warm climate and a welcoming space where we can listen, understand, respect, help, love, and embrace them. Trauma-informed care and the empathy-oriented pandemic pedagogy, it should focus on achieving effective outcomes rather than on the pedagogical outcomes, considering that the cognition comes after emotion, and using didactic methods to push learners to learn more will not help them, but it will only cause deeper wounds to open in the post-pandemic time. And since if we think that we cannot open the door of the minds unless we open the doors of heart, and care and empathy centered approaches, this should be the default approach in education, both in COVID and post-COVID world. I'm reminded of the blog by Dr. Vanessa Dennen. She is professor of instructional systems and learning technologies in the Department of Educational Psychology at Florida State University. Her site has a very beautiful tagline. It says, people first, content second, and technology third. That I like very much. And in one of her articles, she offers a good starting point by proposing that our educational understanding should be shaped by the following priorities. Right? People should be first, content should be second, and technology should be third. So in the end, the technology and education are meant to be for the people. And such an approach should always be our mantras as educators. And how we can personalize distance education, and how we can benefit from the theory and practice of distance education. This learning journey has many different paths and scenarios and entry points. And in this sense, following the new normal or next normal of this great online experiment, the emergency remote education, there will be a tendency to adopt blended and hybrid modes of education, which come from the idea of blending the strength of one type of mode and neutralizing the weaknesses of the other mode. And it is futile to compare face-to-face with distance education, as there is no race between these education modes, Rather, a collaboration and cooperation between these two modes should be our priority. Here, the idea and the intention is to make the education as flexible as possible by giving more control and autonomy and independence to the learners, and by making the use of technology to help them in an effective way. But we can argue that this crisis can be an opportunity for a renaissance in education. We can use alternative assessments, evaluation methods, benefit more from either e-learning, m-learning, u-learning, welcome more these micro-credentials, or empower virtual student mobility. And we can embrace the informal learning as an extension of formal learning, which would require us to have a significant respect for the recognition of prior learning in these settings. So to conclude, and just by definition, if we say that an alchemist, who is that? Who he means transforms or creates something through a seemingly magical process. And particularly in his work, The Alchemist, Paul Coelho, he narrates that when you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it. He further suggests in the same work that it is the possibility of having a dream come true that makes life interesting. So inspired by these words and the way alchemists are defined, it is our hope that the educators will take the role of the alchemist and develop, refine, purify, and perfect the educational system to achieve a learning ecosystem that works for everyone. As educational alchemists, we should dream of a better future, fight for it, work for it, to ensure that the education evolves in its true form, the ideal form, and irrespective of normal, new normal, or next normal, education has always been the grounds of a shadow war between those who want to control the masses and those who want to use the education to liberate minds and hearts, or thoughts and souls. So this pandemic has been a crisis for everyone, yet we can turn this crisis into an opportunity by reimagining, redesigning, and recalibrating education to make it accessible, equitable, and inclusive, to free knowledge, to democratize the societies, and to give the an independency to the learners, so that they can, in this time and in the post time, they can easily navigate, traverse, and pollinate multiple paths and dimensions of a true learning ecology, where the learners, they can find their true selves. So thank you so much. And let me stop my screen sharing. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I put the People Who Need People song by Barbara Streisand. If anyone wants to get a sense of what it means for people to need people, great movie too, funny girl. Your sense of humor is absolutely amazing. And you know what? It kept, I started thinking that actually education was never normal.
Yeah.
School is not normal. Going to school is not normal. The education system is not normal. None of that is normal. So why are we surprised? You know?
We human beings are not normal.
I mean, learning is normal, but the way we are doing it through, you know, through this unnatural way, you know, of going to school, sitting behind desks, is that normal to sit behind desks? Or in a...
That is like putting us in a cage.
That's right. You know, yeah. Exactly. Or, you know, in the lecture halls that are so huge, you know, with thousands of students in those big lecture halls, you know, what's normal about that? So, you know, as educators, I think we're used to abnormal.
Actually, you reminded me of a good instance. In 2004, I had gone to This is called as Southern Technology University of Taiwan, STUT, in Taiwan. There I had taught digital design. And before that, I had heard that there are large classes where teachers use microphone. And I always used to wonder, why do you use microphone? Why can't you just speak? No, the teachers, the students will listen to you. But there in Taiwan, in a university, I really saw a very huge auditorium kind of hall in which students were sitting and teacher cannot speak without using microphone. And that was it. And really, I was wondering that, oh my God, this is really, a challenge in having, and particularly, but now I think technology, there are certain softwares available, particularly, and like China has taken a lead in which they have created some sort of social index, like they are observing the behavior of population, how they behave on the road, and then they give them some kind of ranking. And if it is a bad ranking, you are in trouble, because the face recognition technology, it watches you. And this technology, I think, has a greater educational value also, because the softwares, it can analyze whether the student is interested or disinterested, and what we can have a suitable intervention for these kind of situations. So
I guess it wouldn't work with a mask. If students come with their masks, it's definitely not going to work. So
and mask, and then like you and me who wear specs,
glasses. No,
glasses.
That's true too. All right, thank you very much. You did it in the right time. You were able to make it. So thank you for that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
We're going to, there were quite a few people, by the way, Dr. Sharma, on YouTube.
Oh, wonderful.
Viewing. Yes. And I'm sure more will, because this is a huge topic and your presentation was really, really well done and researched. So thank you. Thank you, everyone.